churches, about 150 of them. And so if anybody needs a hymnal, don't go buying one from Cokesbury. These are used, but they're still in pretty good shape. You can take one home with you if you want. Your very own United Methodist hymnal. All right, let's try this now. So far, so good. And you folks are invited to move up. There are 3 pews empty here. Since we're not doing worship, you can sit up front. You don't have to sit in the back. Come on up. From the back rows, come on up closer. I'll tell you why. I ended up making the font too little on some of the slides, and Michael changed it a bit, so I just want to make sure you can see the screen okay. Am I blocking your view? Okay. I see a blue light on the camera. Does that mean we're live streaming already? We're good to go. Okay. One more minute. I think this lectern was made to stand and not sit. I feel like it's right in my chin. I'll move it back, move this stool out of the way. That works. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to all those who are live streaming. I hope you can see and hear everything tonight. If you have any questions, please write them down and get a hold of me. If you don't know my cell phone number, you're welcome to call the church office and get it. Come on up front. Sit up close. Yes. Could not hear them. Right. Well, we'll try that, but what I usually find is people hold the mic too far away and then can't hear it anyway, but I will repeat the questions anyhow. It's on, it's hot. Okay, let's begin. Will you pray with me? Come, Holy Spirit, and fill the hearts of your faithful, and kindle in us the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and we shall be recreated, and you shall renew the face of the earth. O God, who by the light of the Holy Spirit did instruct the hearts of the faithful, grant that by the same Holy Spirit we may be truly wise and ever enjoy your consolations through Christ our Lord. Amen. So, nearly 800 delegates from across the worldwide United Methodist Church gathered in Charlotte, North Carolina from April 23rd until May 3rd for the postponed 2020 General Conference. It was postponed at first because of COVID. It was actually scheduled for after the time when the lockdown began. And then it was scheduled for 2022, I think it was. And then it was discovered that many of the foreign delegates could not get visas in time. There was such huge queues at the embassies opening up after COVID that some of the visa waits were literally 3 years long, and even now, very long waits, queues for visas. So they kept postponing it, and finally, they scheduled it for this year. 4 years late, and what they decided was they're going to have another one in 2 years so that they can catch up with some of the new stuff that needs to be done as well. As it is, there were over 1,000 petitions and resolutions that were presented. Over 1,000, can you imagine? So tonight, we're going to start with number 1, and we're going to go through 1,083. Did you bring supper? Did you bring your sleeping bags? No, we're not going to do that. We are going to go through just a few of them, the major ones that affect churches around here, and around the world as well. So I'm just going to give you basically the highlights, all right? I'm not going to report on all of them. I have to confess that some of the ones that I had prepared for prior to General Conference, based on my reading of the pre-conference materials that they sent out, actually I did look through almost all of those 1,000 petitions. I skimmed some of them, but based on that, I was surprised by one or two of them that didn't go the way that that was predicted, let's put it that way. And then I asked people who are in the know, who know more about General Conference than I do, I said, why is it that things go the way they do? Every time I've prepared for General Conference, there have been surprises. And they said it's because we can never predict the way that all the delegates will vote. Some of them vote as blocks. For Africa, for example, they go a certain way and so on. So that's why some of the results of this were not what we expected. But you'll see as we go along, okay? I'm going to put this away for now, my cell phone out of reach. I found my cell phone interferes with the transmitter of my lapel mic. How about that? Okay. So we'll start with conference happened this time in Charlotte, North Carolina. And there were over 800 delegates from across the world. And there were about 75 who didn't get their visas in time to be able to attend, which was really sad. They tried as hard as they could to get everybody there, and it just didn't happen. I happen to know from seminary days the man who is in charge of setting up General Conference every 4 years, Alan Morrison. He's a pastor in the Western PA Conference, and he's wonderful, he's amazing. Can you imagine the logistical arrangements he had to make well in advance for something like this? Well, Alan told me that the best they could do was what they did. It's probably the toughest one that he's ever had to put on, and he's done like 8 or 10 of them. And he's been doing this for like 30 years, and Alan said this was by far the hardest one for him to arrange. As it is, we had 6 lay and 6 clergy from East Ohio Conference who attended. And then we also had alternates who sat in the wings waiting. And guess what? The last couple of days, you had someone from this church who attended as well. Doris Brown went. Kenny and Doris both attended. Who else went with you? No, just you? Not Kenny. You drove by yourself? No, you went? Okay. So you drove and attended the last, 3 days? 3 days of conference. And you got to see it live in person. And I had to settle for the live stream. But it was live streamed, and it is now available. Everything is available now. And what I did look at yesterday was the highlights of worship, and that was pretty good. I enjoyed that. Okay, each of our 6 lay and 6 clergy delegates from East Ohio were put on a legislative committee, and there were, I think, 11 legislative committees altogether that looked over all those 1,000 petitions and resolutions and presented the ones that they would pass onto the plenary sessions that were held each day. So, what did they decide? Let's go through that quickly. The first one that I'm going to talk about is something called regionalization. Day 3 of General Conference made history when delegates, by a vote of 586 to 164, adopted, that's 586 to 164, well over the 50% margin. They adopted the first piece of worldwide regionalization legislation presented by the Standing Committee on Central Conferences. Now you might ask, what are central conferences? When the United Methodist Church was formed, they had annual conferences, the ones in the US, and they also had central conferences, which are overseas. Eastern Europe, Africa, Philippines were all central conferences. And this was left over from the days when we used to have African Americans who were part of central conferences, even in the US. And we did away with that years and years ago, but we still had conferences from outside the US that were separate from the US conferences. So what happened was, over the years, it became evident that there were issues that only the US conferences had to decide on that didn't affect Africa, the Eastern Europe, and other places. And they kept saying, why can't we have our own regional conferences instead? And so finally this was voted on and enacted, and it became reality for us. Under the legislation, the US and the central conferences in Africa, Europe, and Philippines each becomes a regional conference with the same authority. Each one has its own authority to adapt the Book of Discipline of the United Methodist Church, which is our policy book, for more missional effectiveness that is contextualized for the local area. And that way they can be faithful to the mission of the United Methodist Church in their region and reach that particular area. Bishop Tracy Malone said, the gift of regional, you know who she is? How many of you know who Bishop Tracy Malone is? Most of you do. She is the East Ohio Conference resident bishop. And she said the gift of regionalization is that we still remain connected around our mission as a church, connected around our essentials of the faith. We are still a connectional church. We value unity, we value diversity, we value difference. So regionalization really is a plan and a way forward for the church to help us to live more fully into that unity and also into that diversity. Further history was made on days 8 and 9. The legislators approved legislations that removed restrictive, prohibitive language from both the Constitution and the social principles in the Book of Discipline. They voted, I'm going to give you the votes here, it's up there too, 692 to 51 to remove the current restrictions on self-avowed practicing gay clergy and on performing same-sex marriages, while protecting those who choose not to perform same-sex marriages or have same-sex marriage in their church. 692 to 51. And I wondered, how come all those African conferences that were opposed to same-sex marriage could vote in favor of this resolution? And I found out the reason is because of the regionalization that we just talked about. They know that this is a good thing to be able to remove the restrictive language so that each conference is able to make its own decisions on it. So imagine that. So many of the Africans and Eastern Europeans and Filipinos voted for this as well. The next day, the General Conference delegates, by a vote of 523 to 161, that's still 4 times more than the nays. The ayes are more than the nays. They approved as amended legislation that will revise the social principles, removing the phrase, the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. Now, I want to point out to you that these restrictions and prohibitive language are a new thing for United Methodists. For Methodist Episcopal Church, from 1784, these didn't exist until 1972. For EUB, Evangelical Church, and also the United Brethren Church, until they merged, none of this existed. And removing it from the social principles was going back to the social principles of 1908. 1908 is when the United Methodist Church, well, it was actually not United Methodist back then, it was the Methodist Episcopal Church, in their social principles, actually made a statement that we will not discriminate against anybody. Can anyone think of what happened around 1908 to the 1920s? What was the significant thing that happened in the USA? Anybody know? 1920, slaves Yeah, we actually defeated slavery back with the Civil War, but it took decades before that caught up with practice. But the significant legislation in 1920 that I looked up was the amendment to the Constitution that allowed women to vote. So there was still discrimination against people's right to vote. And in the original Constitution, it said that African Americans or non-whites could only be, it had to take 5 of their votes to equal 3 of the white votes. And we had done away with that by the 1920s. So ever since then, we've been moving toward less restrictive language. And this just, it was introduced in 72, and now we've taken it out again. So just want to be clear on that one. If anybody has questions on that, I'll be glad to talk with you more about that. We'll move on. Adopted new legislation granting authority to deacons to preside at the sacraments in their ministry settings. So deacons will now be like local pastors. Some of them, a few of them, serve local churches. I know of one deacon who's serving a large church in Cleveland, and she will be allowed to preside over sacraments. Up until now, only the elders could, and local pastors could in their local settings. Now, deacons will also be able to in their local settings. Most deacons serve in service ministries. They're principals of schools. They run counseling centers. They run treatment centers, different kinds of things like that. But now they will also be able to preside at sacraments of Holy Communion and baptism. So it's whether that's a church, an outreach ministry, or a mission. We'll talk about, if anybody wants to know how does that affect us as a church, our church doesn't have any deacons, as far as I know. Are any deacons hiding among you? No, I don't think so. But for us, it probably won't mean any change. But can you imagine the struggle that some elders would have had? They said, well, why do we bother becoming elders if the deacons do the same thing? And my answer to that, sitting on the board of ministry, is to say deacons and elders are both equal ordained orders in the United Methodist Church. They have been for the last 35 years or so. And because they're equal ordained orders, therefore it makes sense to do this, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, next one. We reduced the number of bishops in the USA. We approved a plan from the Interjurisdictional Committee on the Episcopacy. That's another one of those committees that I told you about. To move from the current 39 bishops serving the 5 jurisdictions in the US to 32 bishops, okay? We've been reducing bishops, about every decade or so. When I started in ministry in 1992, we had 50 bishops. That was a nice number. I could memorize it, I could remember it. Now I'm going to have to memorize 32. It's a different number. But that's what we will go from. In our North Central jurisdiction, we're going from 9 to 6 bishops, with 2 retiring and 1 being, I don't know what's going to happen. Well, yeah, that'd be from 9 to 6. Ohio's going to have 1 bishop. Does anybody remember when there was only 1 bishop in this area in Ohio? It was like 100 years ago. But we're going back to 1 bishop. And I don't remember it either. It's before my time. So we're going to have 1 bishop, but we're going to continue with 2 conferences for now. Okay, we'll still have the East and West conferences. Who that bishop will be is going to be decided in July. Okay? We don't know who it'll be. Okay, number 5. Not moving, not moving, not moving. I don't know. Did it freeze up? There, thank you. So, by a vote of 647 to 31, they approved a 2025 to 28 budget for the whole denomination of $373.4 million. That total is contingent on collection rates being at 90% or more for the next 2 years. If across the whole denomination we get 90% of apportionments collected, that's what it'll be, which is about 38% of what it is now. No, it's a drop of 38%. Okay, so they've lowered it just in one conference, in this conference, by 38%. And if giving is below that, then it'll be lowered by another 20 million to 353.6 million. And that would be a 41% drop from what it is now, what it was set by the 2016 conference. So why do you think they dropped the budget so much? Because about 25% of the churches in the US have disaffiliated, and we don't have their income to count on. So it's just the right thing to do. I think it was a good move on the part of our General Conference, and it was one that was necessary. Okay, number 6. Whoops. 6. What happened to 6? Oh, that is 6. Okay, I don't know why it's got 7 on the bottom. I can't count right today. All right. The new Council of Bishops president is Bishop Tracy Malone. And because she's going to be the Council of Bishops president, I have a good hunch that she won't be our bishop anymore. It's quite likely that we'll get someone else. And other new people, 26 laypersons, were consecrated to a lifetime of service as deaconesses and home missioners. Does anybody know any deaconesses or home missioners? Doris knows. She's a deacon, but any deaconesses, they're different from deacons. No, that doesn't count. Deaconesses are different from deacons, okay? Deacons are an ordained order, and deaconesses are consecrated, and they're usually women. I mean, I can pretty much guarantee they're women. Like 100% of them are women. That's why the ESS on the end. The only deaconess I ever knew closely was my mother. She was consecrated a deaconess round about the year 1970, I think it was. And she was a deaconess all her life. It's a lifetime consecration. And she served in service, especially to what was known as the WSCS at one time, the Women's Something for Christian Service. Women's Society for Christian Service. That's right. I have to think about it because it went away and UMW came along, and now we have the United Women of Faith. And she was a deaconess. And home missioners, those are usually people who stay for a lifetime of ministry and mission here in the U.S. 16 missionaries were also commissioned to go out into the world, some of them for U.S. as well. I remember when my wife and I were commissioned in 1984 to be missionaries. Okay, number 7. We approved an agreement of full communion with the Episcopalian Church. Now, the way that works is we have to be in line with what they teach as their doctrine and ministry, and they have to be in line with ours in pretty much like a 90% agreement. The last time this happened was in 2009. We started approving it in 2005. It took 4 years before the Lutherans and the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America and the United Methodist Church joined in full communion. And now we've started the process, and it'll probably take some time until 2027 until that's ratified. The reason why it takes this long is because even though we approve it, they have to approve it as well. And when they do, then we'll be in full communion. Okay, we have other churches that we're already in full communion with. You've got a list there: African Methodist Episcopal, African Methodist Episcopal Zion. We shorten those to AAME and the AME Zion Church. UMP, the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. Have you heard of that one? Christian Methodist Episcopal Church? I've never seen one, but most of them are in the South. And the ELCA, that's the Evangelical Lutheran Church. Have you seen any of those? They're all around here. That's the predominant branch of Lutheranism here in this area. Okay? That's the church that my wife is serving right now as a pulpit supply pastor. The United Church of Sweden, the United American Methodist Episcopal Church, the Moravian Church, northern and southern provinces. So those are the ones we're in full communion with, and there are a whole bunch that we have what we call concordant agreements, which means we honor each other's ministry and so on. But what full communion means is that if there's an Episcopalian who is baptized Episcopalian, confirmed Episcopalian, belongs to an Episcopalian church. Does anyone know an Episcopalian church around here? St. Timothy's in Massillon. That's Episcopalian. Anybody from that church can come in here and receive Holy Communion, and they can't vote on a church council, but they have all other rights pretty much to be in worship here. Okay? So that's what that means. And we can go to their church and the same thing. Can you go to the Roman Catholic Church and receive Holy Communion? Nope, not allowed. Can you go to the Southern Baptist Church? Probably not. They may let you, but by their rules, we don't have full communion with them. Is your baptism recognized by the Southern Baptists? No, it's not. So anyway, that's the distinction. We are still separate from them, but we have full communion and we recognize each other's ministry. Baptism, ministry, and Eucharist. I keep it with those three letters, B-E-M. Those three things we share in common, baptism, Eucharist, and ministry. Okay, we voted number 8. See, I'm almost done. Then we can leave. No, just kidding. Number 8, we voted in a new retirement program, retirement plan for clergy. And this one came as a surprise to me. I know I've been getting emails about it for a while, but I've been surprised for a while about this. In 2005, the United Methodist Church was recognized for the first time. A nonprofit was recognized, nonprofit denomination of the Christian church, any Christian branch, was recognized by Plan Ahead, which is a company that looks at retirement plans all across the U.S. And they said we had one of the best retirement plans in the world. How about that? We were the plan sponsor of the year for Plan Sponsor magazine. We were the plan of the year, retirement plan of the year for them. They selected us and honored us with, I don't know, a little glass trophy or something, whatever it is. It probably didn't cost much because they can't spell retirees' money. But whatever it was, I didn't know about that until one of our CPAs in my Boardman church came up to me and said, "Look at this, Pastor Ash, this issue of Plan Ahead magazine or whatever, we're plan sponsor of the year." And she said, I read this in detail, I looked it up, and you guys are entering into one of the best retirement plans in the world. Well, guess what? That was in 2005. Here, 20 years later, that plan is no longer the best one. So they have revised it, and they now have one that's very similar to a 401k. And that is the plan that my daughter-in-law, Heidi, who serves at Brecksville United Methodist Church as their pastor, she's going to be a part of this plan. And I'm happy for her. This means that, like most other 401ks, each pastor has to put some money into it, and then that'll be matched by the church. Have you heard of plans like that? Does anyone else have plans like that you know of? Yes, some of you do? 401ks where you put money in and it gets matched by someone else? Yeah. That's quite a common thing in industry, and we've got a plan that's very similar to that now. So that, I think, was significant for the pastors. We've always taken good care of our pastors, sometimes with great expense to our churches, and that's been sad, but it is what it is. Okay, number 9, we approved the departure of 4 Eurasian annual conferences that plan to become autonomous Christian Methodist Church. Every few years, churches do that. They become strong enough to stand without our help, financial help, without our structural help. And they say, we'd like to be our own churches, but remain as sister churches with the United Methodist Church. When I was, about 14 years old, the Methodist Church in India that I grew up in split away from the Methodist Church in the U.S. They were able to fend for themselves financially, no longer needed money to pay for the bishop's salaries and for the land and missions that they had as much as they did. And they then went autonomous, and that is exactly what's happening in Eurasia, that land mass between Europe and Asia. So the churches there, 4 conferences there, have become autonomous as of this, and general conference. And I think that's a good thing. We planted missionaries there who built the church. Now the churches are strong enough, and they're sending out missionaries elsewhere too. That's what happened with the church in India. Send missionaries to Fiji and other places. So, next one, the last one I have, and then we'll go into a discussion. No more United Methodist Discipline, paragraph 2553. Do you remember what that paragraph was? That's the disaffiliation clause paragraph. That one was put into place in 2019 to make a way for churches to leave the United Methodist Church in a very systematic fashion. Each conference set the rules, and each conference could talk individually with the churches and collectively and say, these are what the rules are, and these are the conditions in which you can afford to leave. Imagine what it would be like if a small church that had land that was worth $6 million was asked to come up with $6 million to leave. They couldn't do it. Instead, from 2019 until December 31st of last year, 2023, we made possible for 4 years a possibility for them to leave, and they had all 4 years to do that. So most of the ones that wanted to leave back then left. And some of them went to Global Methodists, some of them became independent churches, and you know the story already. So now that paragraph 2553, there was a petition to renew it and extend it. It was overwhelmingly voted down. And the argument was, they've had 4 years, we're done. It's time to move on. So there will be no more disaffiliation process, which was set by each conference. Does that mean a church can't leave? No. We just go back to what we had before. If a church wants to leave the denomination and keep its own property, it will need to have a conversation with the cabinet and the conference building and grounds committee. The trust clause has always been in place, and it was never revoked, and it's still there. So it still goes on. And if someone wants to know more about the trust clause, I can explain that in a little bit. Okay, that's the gist of it. I have some questions and answers that people have asked me, and I'm going to address those in a bit. And now I'm going to open up for you to offer your questions and answers. Can you turn on the hot mic, please? Ouch. Ouch, he turned it on, it's hot. Okay. Anybody have a question? Don't be the first one. Yeah.
So one of the slides that you talked about, but I think was an emphasis, it was a big part of the second week, and it talked about all of the changes that were to the social principles pertaining to human sexuality. One of the things that was contentious that I observed was the revisions to paragraph 425.1.
Okay.
And so in those in the revisions of this, and then I have it here, I can read it for you guys.
Yeah, please do, please do.
So 425.1 states, responsibility -1, clergy shall be appointed by the bishop, who is empowered to make and fix all appointments in the episcopal area of which the annual conference is a part. Appointments are to be made with consideration of the gifts and evidence of God's grace of those appointed to the needs, characteristics and opportunities of congregations and institutions, and with faithfulness to the commitment to an open itineracy. Open itineracy means appointments are made without regard to race, ethnicity, origin, gender, color, disability, marital status, sexual orientation, or age, except for the provisions of mandatory retirement. Annual conferences shall, in their training of staff parish relation committees, emphasize the open nature of the itineracy and prepare congregations to receive the gifts and graces of appointed clergy without regard to race, origin, gender, color, disability, marital status, economic conditions, sexual orientation, or age. The concept of the itinerary is important, and sensitive attention should be given in appointing clergy with physical challenge to the responsibilities and duties that meet their gifts and graces. So this particular paragraph has been a catalyst for the debate on annual conferences having to be made responsible to train staff parish relations to be able to receive individuals who are of homosexual.
Okay, so,
Sorry.
yeah, hang on to the mic for just a moment.
Yeah.
You can switch it off, or no, Michael, would you switch it off for a moment? Okay. Regarding the UMC rules on LGBTQ, they've taken out an official policy that spreads across the whole denomination. Okay? There's no policy officially on LGBTQ ordinations or doing weddings. It'll depend on each region. You remember the 4 regions we have now? Each region will set policy or not. Because they took that part out, each region will set its own policy or not. It's up to each church to set its own policies. And it is also up to each pastor to decide whether to seek ordination or whether to do LGBTQ plus weddings. Okay? So, oh, I'm sorry, turn
That
back.
was emphasized, so if
Right.
one of the general conference's slides, you didn't show it up here, I was kind of hoping you would. It made a footnote saying that specific thing,
Right.
that churches will be able to state their position
Correct.
regarding human sexuality, as will pastors.
Correct.
Now,
So-
what's not exactly clear, and it wasn't even clarified in jurisdictional conference, or the
Right.
what's judicial
Judicial
conference,
conference, right.
is if a pastor chooses not to marry a same-sex couple, but the church policy and the church trustees say it is allowable, who wins?
Right. Okay, so basically here's what happens. Let's take the one about ordination first, okay? If this church decides we do not want to receive a pastor who's LGBTQ, it's a possibility. If we decide that, then we don't actually have to make a policy about that. We just have to have a conversation with the DS when you get a pastoral change. And the DS will honor that, will not appoint here an LGBTQ pastor. Yes?
That's not law in the church, though, correct? That is simply their statement.
No? They've taken out any kind of law about that. So,
Correct. So
What-
it's just their word.
no, what happens then is, it's not just their word,
Okay.
okay? Because the policy is set by conference, I can tell you the East Ohio Conference is still very conservative, right? So the
Okay.
conference can set that, but we as a church can set our policy. And there's nothing to prevent us from telling the DS, this is our policy, and they'll have to honor that. That is not just on our word.
They
So we can-
specifically stated that open itinerancy is extremely important, and they
Right.
will be training all
Staff, right.
parish relations to accept any LGBT, that's what it says.
No, I know it says that, but that's only in the regions where it's allowed, and in the conferences where it's going to be allowed, that sort of thing. Now, I know it says that, however, I talked with the chair of the Board of Ministry yesterday about this, and he made it clear that, first of all, when it comes to appointments, yes, we are always itinerant. However, they will have to take into consideration what we put on our profile. Okay?
I'm sorry if I'm a
Let me-
little bit,
I know.
because
No, we put it in writing.
Costello stood up in this church and told us that there would be a disaffiliation after this general conference, which did not happen. So that's why I think some of us are a little bit wanting to know the exact, the wording, because we've been told things that are not true. So
Well, who told you there would be a disaffiliation?
DS Cara Costello.
But she didn't,
She said
wait a
there
minute.
will be a path for disaffiliation.
Well, that was the hope. And there was a petition for that.
She didn't say a hope, she said it would
Well,
happen. I'm sorry.
When I talked before conference, I said that's one of the petitions that's coming up. And like I said, nobody knows what happens at conference until it's actually decided. And it was not close, right?
Tell me that there wasn't some intimation that was the way it was going to go.
Yeah, well, there was some hope that it would be a path to it, right? That there would be a path for it. I'm not telling you that there wouldn't be a hope. I'm saying that even I was surprised by that one.
And trust are fragile things.
Yeah, and if you, I did. When I put the slide up there prior to conference, general conference, you saw the slide that said there will be a petition for a path for disaffiliation that will extend it until December the 31st of 2000, whatever.
Nobody is disputing that, Pastor
Right.
Ash. We're saying that someone else from the
Right.
conference told us
That there would be something like
and
that.
it was incorrect. And so I want it to be extremely clear that they are saying they will not appoint.
Right.
But I am not seeing that in legislation at this time. Perhaps it will be in the future, but at this time, I do not believe it is.
Okay, I spoke with the chair of Connectional Ministries who retired last year, Steve Court. He knows church law better than anybody else I know. Okay, he used to be a lawyer. I spoke with John Preby, who is the chair of the Board of Ministry, and both of them said, while there is not going to be a general ruling on that, because they've taken out all the wording about LGBTQ, they both stated that as far as our church is concerned, if we do not want to receive an LGBTQ pastor, we have to state that on our profile. We do our profile once a year, and we can just add it to that profile and say, we don't want to accept an LGBTQ pastor. And the bishop's cabinet is supposed to honor that and appoint somebody who is missionally matched to our congregation. That would be the same as churches that don't want a woman pastor, don't want an African American or a Spanish pastor, Hispanic pastor, somebody who doesn't want to accept a pastor from Eurasia. We would be under the same rules as any other thing. What we choose to discriminate on can be stated in writing when we do our church profile. Okay. Okay, I was going to get to that thing next, okay? Let me finish the ordination part of it. So, yes.
I understand there's a lot of pastors that have left the United Methodist Church. As a result, they're going to be short on pastors. So, now wait.
Yeah.
So we can request that we don't want a gay pastor, but we may get one anyway because they're short-handed.
Okay. Now, the answer to that is, back in December, when it was clear that I was coming here and I had a better idea of who this church was, I spoke with our DS, and then again in March, and Doris was present at the meeting in March when I spoke with both the two DSs who are in our larger district now. And with both of them at both times, I have said that I am available to be appointed beyond my 6-month interim appointment, either to Otterbein or to another church. Back in December, it was, I'm available for Otterbein beyond the 6 months. And 4 weeks later, our DS brought somebody to be introduced to the SPRC, and they asked at that meeting, can't we keep Ash here? And the answer was, no, that's not how our system works. We're itinerant. We may find something else for him or move on. It became very clear to me last week when the bishop's assistant from another denomination sent me an email that said, Bishop Tracy Malone has made it clear that there is no appointment for you in the United Methodist Church come July 1st. And so I will not be serving a United Methodist Church after that. What that tells me also, when I asked in December, is there, not a shortage, but an extra number of pastors in the East Ohio Conference? And here's how I figured that. We had 248 churches leave, okay? We had about 36 pastors who retired, Okay, now deduct that 36 from 248, and what do you get? 212, okay. We had about 6 pastors who left on disability or whatever kind of leave, so that leaves 206 pastors, okay, that we should have excess pastors for. And as I kept counting down, I came up with an excess of 150 pastors in the East Ohio Conference who are going to need appointments. 150 extra. Because not that many pastors left to join the Global Methodist Church as the number of churches that left. And the evidence for that, you can see, is because they're still trying to recruit us. We who are still in appointments. The Global Methodist Church is still hitting us up saying, come on over. And they're saying, we'll give you ordination. You have a free, a fast track path, and so on. So we do not have a shortage of pastors. We do have, in fact, more pastors than we need right now, and they're filling all the slots with pastors. Now, district-wise, that's a little bit different. Kelly Brown's district, Southern Forest District, has a shortage of elders. That is true. So he asked me if I would serve a couple of churches in his district for a little while until they got somebody in there. I never heard back from him because he found somebody to fill that place. I am a retired pastor. I don't have a right to a full-time appointment in the Methodist Church. I'll admit that. That's the truth. I'm available for it, but that's not the same as saying appoint me, okay? But the fact is, we do not have a shortage of pastors in the United Methodist Church in the East Ohio Conference. Now, regarding LGBTQ pastors, there are very few that I know of, only just maybe 1 or 2 who have not been ordained in the East Ohio Conference, who will now probably be ordained. Okay? Very few, maybe 1 or 2. And as far as where they will go, it'll probably be churches that are willing to accept them, more progressive churches. So
I want to ask a question. This is to the body. This is not to you, Ash.
Yeah.
We can sit here and say that we're concerned about the revisions to the social principles as it pertains to human sexuality. But what do we as Otterbein believe the Bible says relative to human sexuality? We have not had that conversation. We have not gone through that period of discernment. Why are we putting the cart before the horse?
shall we do that soon, like next week? Next Wednesday night? I've 5, 6 weeks left.
With us.
Yes, but I have time to start that process. I had something planned, hold on. I had something planned starting next week for 3 weeks. I was going to do a Christianity 101 class, and that was basically for people to understand what Christianity is all about, and it's leading up to United Methodism. But I'm willing to give that up so that we can start having that discussion starting next Wednesday night.
I think that's for the church leadership to decide
Okay?
the direction of
Yeah,
this
but the ad
church.
council is not meeting. Now committee's meeting next week, right? Now committee's on Wednesday night. Monday night at 7 p.m. And if they want to, they can say, let's do that. Now, as far as the direction of this church, yes, we need to find that out, and we need to have talk about it now, and that would be a good idea. I'd like to get as much of that in before I leave, okay? Can we go on to the, let's decide to wait and see what Now Committee says, and if they schedule that, then we'll go ahead and I'll be available
I
for
can
that.
ask another question. We can switch subjects a little bit if you want me to.
Yep.
Okay. Can you share with us your impressions of the revisions to the social principles as it pertains to how they have defined or redefined marriage? And
Sure.
I can read that
Sure.
for you if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I read it too, but go ahead. Read it aloud for everybody.
Where's it at? Marriage redefined. Within the church, we affirm marriage as a sacred lifelong covenant that brings two people of faith, an adult male and a woman of consenting age, or two adult persons of consenting age into union with one another. And this was another hot button topic as it unfolded at
discussed, yeah,
plenary.
right. Yep. So, you want my opinion of that?
Yeah, let's start with that.
Social principles.
So just for your guys' own reference, I think they're calling this the double barrel approach
Yeah,
to marriage. It kind of that caught a tag
yeah.
and is resonating throughout the community with that.
Right. So for me, I have a definition of marriage that goes back to my childhood upbringing and so on, that I got into a big argument with my sons about when I said, for me, marriage, as defined by the English language, it's a semantic thing, means a marriage between a man and a woman. Not a biblical thing, but a semantic thing. It's the definition of marriage that I have. I said we need another word for what the Supreme Court allowed to happen in 2015. Remember the Hodges versus Obergefell, or the other way around, Obergefell versus Hodges case that came out of Cincinnati, Ohio, and worked its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court decided that gay people, as well as all heterosexual people, LGBTQ people, have just as much a right to a marriage as anybody else. Now, let me say that since we're becoming a regional church, and this is important to keep in mind, since we're becoming a regional church, and we will have local differences of context, understanding of Scripture, and so on, we are going to, and this is to your question about gay marriage, we are going to be able as a church, and I have this from the two authorities I talked to who know conference so well, have been to General Conference. They both said that we as a church can set our own policy about marriage. We can decide that the only marriages that will be performed here are marriages between male and female. Okay? And that can be our policy. Now, here's the challenge.
Can I ask you just one?
Yeah.
Did they speak on if the church were to decide that it did not want to hold a LGBTQ wedding, but the pastor...
Yep, I'm getting to that right now. Right now. That's my next thing, okay? Now, when that was brought at General Conference, somebody asked that very question, what if a pastor decides they don't want to do an LGBTQ wedding and the church allows for it, or vice versa, that the church allows for LGBTQ weddings, but the pastor doesn't want to do it? What happens then? What about the paragraph in the trustees section that says the trustees can decide on the use of facility? If the trustees make a policy that says we will not do LGBTQ weddings, then how can the pastor go against that? Well, guess what? There's another place in the Book of Discipline that still says that the pastor is in charge of the worship. Weddings are worship. So the pastor could supersede that. Okay? Technically, it's a muddled area because they didn't agree, they decided on the legality of whether the trustees were right in setting policy or not. Now, here's what happens. Who's on trustees? Gary's on trustees, Bud's on trustees, you're on trustees, Nancy. So what happens is trustees all get together, okay? They know what the church wants. And they decide, we're going to set a policy that we will not do LGBTQ weddings in this sanctuary, in this church, on the church grounds anywhere. If there's a pastor appointed who says they want to do such a wedding, and they're okay with it for whatever reason, if it does happen down the road, they will have to go off-site to do that. They can do a wedding at the park or somewhere else. Okay, they can't do it at the church. Why? Because when a pastor is appointed, remember it said there that it should be a missional match. At that point, the conversation comes with the DS that says our trustees already have a policy that says we don't have to do an LGBTQ wedding. Okay? And I'll get into why that's important. And so if the DS appoints a pastor here who would disagree with that, then the DS already knows that pretty soon that pastor's not going to be accepted here, is not going to want to be here, and going to be out. So that could happen too. But here's the thing. Do you remember the case when there was a photographer who was asked to do a lesbian couple's wedding and the photographer refused? Do you remember the case when the Masterpiece Bakery was asked to do a wedding cake for a gay couple, two men, and they refused to do it? And then while that case was working its way up to the Supreme Court, another lesbian couple came to the same bakery and asked for one. Do you remember the case when, let's see, that's baker, photographer, flower shop. Same thing happened with the flower shop, right? All over the nation, people are challenging the right on the basis of religion to break out of what we believe, all right? And every single time, the Supreme Court has come down on the side of separation of church and state. Even though there's no such separation in the Constitution, each of those cases, I looked it up. There were, I believe, 6 or 8 of the cases, and each of the cases, there's a whole list of them, you can find them. Every single case comes down on the side that religion trumps out, and that if a church makes a policy, if the trustees make a policy that we do not want to allow LGBT weddings, then we have the right to do that, and we will not be sued for that. Okay, nobody can win that kind of a lawsuit because it's never been won in the U.S. Now, that's not to say that 10 years from now that might change, but, or 20 years, or 30 years, whatever, I don't know. But right now, we are safe in making that kind of a decision as a church if we choose to, and we cannot be sued for it. So it really doesn't come down to so much as the social principles saying this is allowed, as they're giving permission by taking out the language against LGBTQ for our church to make a policy that says we won't allow it. It becomes now a contextual thing for our specific congregation, a local church thing. And therefore, we are protected in deciding what we want to do as a church. That's the good news.
Yeah, and
It wasn't very clear.
The revision that they made that we just spoke about, they failed to generalize or water down their position there.
Right,
They did explicitly say between 2 consenting Homo sapiens, especially.
Right.
Basically.
right. So basically what they did was they went back to 1908 when the United Methodist Church said we will not discriminate on any basis. That's really what we've done. We've gone back to that. While,
I don't think that they were referring to homosexuality at that point.
in 1908,
In 1908, I know.
no, back then it was about color, gender, and things like that. But
The only reason it was brought up in 1972 because the progressives were pushing that issue, and then it was felt that it needed to be.
that is true, but what I'm saying is that we have always been more of an open church. United Methodism has always been more of an open church, allowing people to come in, and therefore our stand on homosexuality is that even though it may be a sin for most people, we want to invite all sinners because we all are sinners. And even though some people may think that adultery is a sin, we are going to be open for them in worship as well. We're not going to condone it. Right. We're not going to condone
Speaking
it.
of adultery, are we going to talk about the chargeable offenses that were removed for clergy, adultery being one of those?
I'm not going to talk about that specifically today, but
Okay.
yeah, I think we have standards that we have to set as conferences that will vary according to the regions, and East Ohio Conference does have standards that we can set. You know, the rest things were
We're talking
removed.
about what happened at General Conference, and
Right.
it did
But-
happen at General Conference.
Right,
so
but what I'm
I
saying
wanna
is
make sure
when General
everybody
Conference,
knows that.
yeah, when General Conference takes out these things, that doesn't mean we can't set them. We're still allowed to set our own individual, you know, church, pastor, conference is allowed to set things that are,
Did you see the numbers of how they passed?
yeah.
Okay,
Those numbers really surprised me, all of the numbers. Well, I'm not going to go there. I wasn't there, but the numbers were surprising.
I had that same question here. Why do you think they chose to score those out? Why the celibacy and
I have no idea.
The-
Celibacy and singleness, faithful in
Yeah.
marriage.
Why take
that's-
that out?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no idea. I wasn't there. I don't know what the discussion was. You can see some of it online, but you can't see what happened outside of the plenary and things like that. And some of the things, as I said, happened in legislative committees before it even got to plenary. So anyway, what I'm saying is that when you take something out, it doesn't mean that we're not given permission to add it back in as a local church. Okay, that's the important thing to keep in mind. So, okay, one second. Jody's got one first.
The other thing that stood out was that there was a veritable laundry list of left-wing causes, including the lifting sanctions on North Korea, of all things, that were passed through there. And there was not any kind of a compensatory or a counterbalancing. It was very one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
It was a real eye-opener for me to look through and see there. And yeah, I've known that our denomination is a little goofy
Yeah.
at that level.
Well, I can address that. I can address that to some extent. What I think happened was, for so many years, we've had it one way, and then all the churches that, not all, many of the people in the United Methodist Church who were far right, extreme right, left in the last 5 years.
But
Many of
I've
them left.
never seen
So-
anything that you would consider far right come out of a general conference or the East Ohio Conference.
Some people may say the opposite. What transpired in 2019 was far right.
Yeah.
It was in the vein of conservative.
Right, and there were people, and you know, I hate to use labels because that's what we end up doing, is we discuss the labels rather than the issues. So what I'm saying is that we need to examine our own hearts and consciences and move together as a church from here on out. That's important. And we have to know that by taking out so many of the restrictions, that gives us permission to legally put in the ones that we want to choose and for ourselves. Okay, Bonnie.
And that's fine. I get that. But I'm going back to pastors.
Yep, let's get back to pastors. I have a note here.
You say
about
we
it.
have a lot of retired people that are pastors, which is fine, but you also told us that you were not permitted as a retired pastor to take a full-time position. So my question is every church going to have to go through what we have gone through?
No.
By July 1st, having 4 pastors in less than a year?
No. First of all,
That's very difficult.
yeah, first of all, let me state that again. It's not that I will never have a full-time pastorate in the East Ohio Conference or the United Methodist Church. That's not the case. Right now, there is no appointment for me, okay? However, when I am appointed to another denomination, July 1, that appointment letter will clearly state, you are hereby appointed to serve as a missionary to another conference until such time as the United Methodist Church needs you back, okay? That's the kind of appointment my wife has right now while she's doing pulpit supply at a Lutheran church. Her letter of appointment does state that they'll yank me back, or that they'll yank her back. And guess what? She's going to be appointed part-time to a United Methodist Church this fall. She doesn't want a full-time appointment. She said she likes the compliments without the complaints. But that's her opinion. Me, I'll take it all, and I just love it. So right now, there will not be an appointment for me because we do have enough clergy. Let's wait and see a couple of years from now what happens if more clergy leave, or if there aren't as. I can tell you that last year there were this year at annual conference, there will only be 2 clergy ordained, one an elder and one a deacon. So only one of those 2 is going to serve a church. However, there is still a lot more clergy that we have than we have churches right now, and it'll even out in a couple of years. It'll all come, and then we'll know if the church.
Feels very disjointed.
It does,
to
but
have
we don't
this
get the
many
yeah.
pastors in less than a year.
Well, yes, but we don't see the whole picture. Okay, let me share with you that the church I left behind. Bonnie, this is important. No, hang on to that for just a moment until we pass it to someone else. When I left St. Paul Church, July the 1st of 2022, we had a good missional appointment. The pastor who was following me worked with me. Before that, we did 2 videos together to introduce that pastor to the church. The church had never had a female clergy. However, in the 2 short months that they were expecting her to come there, they embraced her because of the way we had prepared together for her to come. They welcomed her with open arms. They looked forward to the changes that she was already going to make. Usually we try not to make any changes in the first 6 months, but I told her, these are the changes this church needs right now. You can't wait. And she agreed with me, and she came in expecting those to be made. Her name was Cheryl Seitz. Some of you know her. She came out of this church. I was Cheryl's mentor at one time when she was coming into the system. I knew her well. I spent 2 long retreats and 2 seminars with her during her first 2 years. Each of those years, we had multi-day retreats and we had single-day seminars. We were together for 10 days a year for those things. She was in the batch with my daughter-in-law, Heidi, and I was a mentor. I knew Cheryl so well. And I knew the area she was coming from, Clyde and Green Springs, the churches there. I knew those churches long before I even thought of going into ministry. And Cheryl came in, and we welcomed her, and we were so excited for her. She did tell us that 6 years before she came, she had kidney cancer, and she licked it. It was in full remission. And yet, within weeks of coming to St. Paul Church in Galion, her cancer returned with a vengeance. She knew what chemotherapy would do to her and what the process of, what's it called when you, the cleaning out, I forget the word, dialysis, thank you. Trans didn't fit, dialysis. She knew what that would do to her, and she was not ready to go through it again. So she made the decision to avoid medical treatment and die in peace. And her funeral was held here. And because I had just left that congregation a few short months before that, I wanted to come, but I could not come to this church. Would have been my first time in this church, and I was not to come for her funeral. It was a sad day for me. However, my wife attended. My wife came to this church before I did. Imagine that. She came here. Nobody could predict what would happen with Cheryl. Not the DS or the bishop or anybody in the conference or anybody in the church or me. Did they want me back? Yes, but I said no. I'm not coming back. I'm in full retirement now. I had hopes of becoming a drug counselor. I wasn't going back into ministry. I wanted to move on with my life. So what did they do? They brought Steve Court there. From the time that Cheryl could no longer physically attend church. Immediately, they had a senior pastor, Steve Court. Senior meaning he's been in ministry longer than I have. He was the chair of the Connectional Ministries. He knows church better than I do, even with my 30 years. Steve is a wonderful man, and he kept them together until December 31st. Does that sound familiar? On January the 1st, Ben Weisbrod, whom I had known for years and never known him. That's another story. Ben was my dear friend from West Ohio Conference. He came in for a 6-month interim period, and he kept that church together. And last year, on July the 1st, they got their full-time pastor, Don Ebert. Don had done 12 years at Wadsworth United Methodist Church, and he went there, and he's leading them now. Don bought a house in Galion. He doesn't need the parsonage. Do you see the parallels? I'm looking at this whole string of things that we're going through here at Otterbein, and I'm saying, deja vu. This is incredible. It's uncanny. It's so weird. God is doing this to this congregation, the same thing that happened to St. Paul Church. But I will tell you this. St. Paul Church grew stronger through all of that. And they came out of there with Don Ebert as their pastor, and they're doing so well right now, a year later. Almost, not quite a year, but it's almost a year later. Don is a very good pastor. His wife is a dental hygienist who, for the 9 years I lived in Galion, and for 1 year after that, she is the only person for 10 years whom I allowed to stick her fingers in my mouth. Now, has it been changed for me personally? Yes, but I have embraced it. Why? Because you, Otterbein Church, have made it such a joy for me to come here, not only to worship, but to serve at meals or say grace and do so much. And yes, I will miss you when I go from here. However, I know that you are a part of a system that keeps working, because the head of that system is not the bishop. The head of that system is not the council of bishops. The head of that system is no one but Jesus Christ. And that will not change. You are under his leadership even now. And as long as you keep that as the core and focus of your mission, then you will be missionaries for Christ in this area. And you will go on. What is our mission statement? Can anybody say it? Mission together to share the ministry of Jesus Christ. Yes, you see it every time you come in. Memorize that and keep that as your focus, and nothing will be wrong from there. You have a pastor who's coming in who's not LGBTQ, okay? Bill Eckert. And Bill is eager to work with you, put in the time and energy and whatever he can to help you along the way. Bill, by the way, has agreed that I will have one more task, and that is to serve as a member of a team that's going out as your missionaries to Steubenville. July the 9th to 13th, we're taking a mission trip. Bill will be on that trip. He'll be the head of your team from Otterbein, and I will be a member by his invitation. Did you hear that? I can't tell you how many teams I led to Joshua in urban mission in Steubenville. Conneaut, Boardman, I took teams from both those churches year after year. This year I get to sit back and watch you all work. No, not really. I will work alongside you, but I'll be a member of the team, and Bill will be the head of that. So anyway, it is what it is, Bonnie, I know, and it's sad, but nobody expected it to be the way it was. As soon as Matt left, I got the first call from Kara. Ash, we need you at Otterbein. Can you go there? We know what you've done in all your appointments up to now. Can you go there? And my answer was, I'm sorry, Kara, I cannot. I have a commitment to this little church that's in my community now, 1 minute from my house. And I told them I'd be there till the end of the year. I never expected a mid-year appointment. Neither did you expect Matt to leave suddenly like that. No, that was not planned. But at the same time, I said, Kara, is there anyone else who can do it? And she called around and she got Carl to agree to coming here and leading you in worship. He said, I won't do more than 25%. My health isn't in it. But he said, I'll do what I can. And guess what? We like Carl so much, we kept him on, didn't we? We kept him on, and he's doing so great. I love Carl. He really works well with me, and I work well with him. And he will work well with Bill as well. He's a good man. So please, we can't do it ourselves. I am nothing without you. In this space, I am nothing without you. But if you will, I have some more notes that some have already been clarified, but let me just read through these real quick, okay? Who decides if a pastor can do LGBTQ wedding in a church, pastor or trustee? It was asked. Here it comes. Pastor has authority over pulpit. Trustees have authority over the building. Trustees need to establish a policy for building use. You have building use policies for pavilion, for fellowship hall. Now it's time to make one for sanctuary. Okay, trustees, that's my challenge to you. You've got one more meeting before I leave, right? Okay. So this is a legal issue, not a theological or doctrinal one. Keep that in mind. Just to protect ourselves in case somebody says the trustees won't let me do an LGBT wedding and so on. Anyway. Can a church resolve not to accept an LGBTQ pastor? This can easily be done in conversation with the DS. It is resolved when the new church profile is created prior to appointment time. Okay, that's the answer that I've been trying to get in writing. I have it here in writing. And that's from me. Somebody else can change it if they want, but that's what I understand based on my conversations with 2 other people in leadership. Higher up than me. Okay, next question. Can a pastor decide whether or not to do LGBTQ wedding? Each pastor can decide based on their own culture, understanding of the Bible, their own upbringing, whatever you want. If the church to which they are appointed has a policy not to allow LGBTQ weddings, the pastor has the freedom to do one outside of the church property. Okay? My father was a very open and loving person. And back when all of this was being argued in 2000 or maybe 1996, whatever, I asked him, would you do one? He had retired already. He said, in a heartbeat. I would marry a gay or a lesbian couple or a trans couple or anybody. And he asked me, would you do it? I said, no, Papa, I wouldn't. And he said, why not? Don't you love everybody? I said, yes, I do. But I said, right now, the rules are that I can't do one, and I would be in violation of the book of discipline. Well, guess what, folks? My umbrella was taken away from me, and I'm now standing in the rain. and I have to decide that for myself. And the good news is I'm retired. I don't have to do it. Or how about I'm retired and I'm going to a church that allows for it, so I'll have to do it. I don't know. All I can say is I don't know what the future holds for me or for you, but I know who holds our future. So let's leave it at that. Pastor has the freedom to do one outside of church property. Last question I have these are my questions, okay, and they may coincide with some of yours. What about the trust clause and church property rights? Who owns the church? The people who purchased the land and built the church buildings own the deeds. Who bought the land? Who built this building? Anybody know? Their people are all gone. Good point. A lot of hard work went into this, right? Yep. A lot of money. Yep. They're all gone. But get this. Hold on. You're right. The deeds have now succeeded to the present local church board of trustees. Who are left here? Who has the deeds? They are now in the hands of the trustees, and the local church still owns the land and buildings and is in possession of the deeds. Nobody can take those deeds away from you. And I'm saying deeds, plural. What are the deeds? There's a deed for the church property and the land. There's one for the parsonage, right? Plural, deeds. Who has the deeds? Doris told me that they're in a lockbox in Bolivar. We still have the deeds. The conference doesn't have them. The United Methodist Church doesn't have them. All they have is a trust clause that goes way back to the beginning of the United Methodist Church. When we built this church, when we bought the land, the people who built it and bought the land knew the trust clause was there. You may not know that, but they did. The church still owns the land and buildings and is in possession of the deeds. That can't be taken away from us now. Ever since the formation of the Methodist Episcopal Church and the United Brethren Church and the Evangelical Church, even before they started to merge, the local church is owned by the church, but it is kept in trust for the denomination. We are not the only denomination with the trust clause. Trustees hold it in trust for the local church and the UMC. I ask you this question.
Can I make a clarifying statement?
Yeah.
It is,
Take the microphone.
it's a little bit of a slippery slope the way that you're describing it. As far as we occupy the legal documents that allow us the right to this property, but just like anybody who puts anything in a trust, the authority of the trust and the ability to execute against it is dictated by the conference.
By who?
So the annual conference, or the East Ohio Conference.
Not exactly, no.
So it's not, I mean, we can't, if we choose to sell our property and we take all the money and the profits and divide it among the congregation, and we go all go on our merry way. That is not a right that we.
No, let me address that real quick, okay? I've been told we have 23 acres of land out here. Is that correct? Right, Doris? We have 23 acres of land out here?
Yeah, I bid the land down there.
You did what?
I said, I bid the land.
You bid the land down there, right, right. And do we have 23 acres?
Not that much. No.
How much do we have? I mean, altogether.
12 acres. This property is 7, and then there's 12 on the agriculture.
Okay, so it's more like 19 acres. 20? Okay, about 20 acres. So this is 7 acres here and 12 acres there, 12 plus, okay? Whatever the exact numbers are, I've been told, and I don't know because I haven't actually looked at the deeds, but let's just suppose that we want to sell the extra acreage there, the 12 plus acres, okay? We have the right to do that. We do have the right to do that. We have a good reason for that. We're going to build a rocket ship that's going to go to the moon. No. That's not fitting into our mission. If we need to sell that land in a way that fulfills our mission, then yes, we have a right to do that. We have a mission that's stated out there for the ministry of Jesus Christ.
But we can't necessarily just sell it because we want to make a profit off of it.
We can sell it because that's land we don't need for the church itself. okay? We're making a profit on it now, right? Somebody's leasing it.
It's paying the taxes.
It's paying the taxes. So we are making a profit on it now. How different would that be if we sold it? It's paying the taxes, so we keep it.
What is the limiting nature of the trust clause then?
Here's what it is. Here's the reason why. Okay, maybe it helps to go back to why John Wesley and Albright and Otterbein and all those people, guess what? Otterbein was one of them. Why they put this trust clause in was because they wanted to say a church should be a part of our system of beliefs, okay? If we want to become Roman Catholic, for example, we can't just go off and do that. We can't just say we're going to owe allegiance to the Pope.
Is that the trust clause? limits us?
That's why it was put in.
So we can't change our sign tomorrow and say we're Southern Baptist?
Nope, we can't. That's why it was put in. Because they wanted to be sure that what is preached from the pulpit falls into our umbrella of Methodism. We talk about a gospel of grace, of love, that's all good. We have open communion, open table, that's all good. But if we say, okay, only people who are members of this church can have communion, that's not fulfilling the overall ministry of the church. So then they can say, all right, well, wait a minute, you can't go into a system that's different. We cannot become Roman Catholics, and that's why the trust clause is there. We cannot become Southern Baptists, and that's why the trust clause is there. What would happen if we said no more baby baptisms anymore? No more infant baptism. We have to still fall under the umbrella. And guess what? The umbrella just shifted and became bigger. And yeah, major shift, it became bigger. It's now a big tent, and it allows us to, within that tent, specify our parameters and be more in control of what we do. But the trust clause was there before, it was there, even with the disaffiliation clause, trust clause was still there. And what that meant was, let's say that Magnolia Church wanted to leave the United Methodist Church, okay? All they had to do was to pay a certain amount of money. They didn't have to pay what the land was valued at. They had to pay 1.5 years of apportionments and the pastor's pension. That was what the trust clause allowed them to do, was to disaffiliate along with paying that much amount of money. Now guess what, if we still want to disaffiliate today, we have a conversation with the DS. And the DS says, you know what, you can't take the value of the land and pay us that. You obviously can't afford how many millions would it be for this? How many, any guess? Anybody want to guess? 30 million? Is that close? No, not that much? Am I high? How many of you say I'm high at 30 million? Should I come down some? 10 million?
I say it's priceless.
Yeah, it is priceless. Yeah, so let's stay here and let's use it all. But if we wanted to buy ourselves out of the United Methodist Church, we still can do that. But the rules of 1 plus half a year of apportionments and pastor's pension, or whatever it was, the pension plus the health care, I think is what they figured on. That 1.5 years, that's gone. Now it'll be negotiated individually with what we can afford and what we can come up with. So that's what it is. But we could not afford to pay for all this land, the 12 acres plus the 7 acres. We couldn't afford to pay for that, and they know that at conference. And they wouldn't want to hold on to us if we want to leave. So they would negotiate with us how much we would pay, and then we could, yes, get out of it. But the trust clause means just that we can't just up and leave and say tomorrow we're changing the sign, we're becoming Southern Baptists, and that's it. We're going to do no more infant baptisms. You have to be a member here in order to have Holy Communion, and we are not going to be open to all. We can't do that anymore. But we can. I'll tell you what, anybody comes in those doors and wants to meet with me and is in need for counseling for grief because they've lost a loved one, or they're holding on to some kind of a sin that has been there for ages, and I help them, they haven't sinned, they've repented, but they're still holding on to the guilt from that, and they want my services. I'm going to be there for them. And if you don't want me to, tell me that now, and I won't. But I think you would agree that we are an open church. We welcome people. We do that. We brought people. I mean, there was a couple who were here for the 80s, 90s dinner last week, and they said, it feels so good to be here. They came with a relative who was in there. And afterwards, I met them in the parking lot. They said, that is a welcoming congregation. We practice hospitality, we do, and we want to continue doing that, and that's a good thing. We have our standards though, right, Jody? We have standards on what's right and wrong, moral standards. And I teach standards to the cadets that I'm with. I teach standards to youth. I teach standards to people and say, this is what God wants us to do and to how to behave and be good. You're not allowed to, well, there's a long list, but.
I think you hit a nail on the head. I don't know if it's the
Which one
nail
was
on
that?
the head. But for you to say that you have moral standards, we all individually have moral standards. We don't know how to collectively address those moral standards and our own interpretation of what the Bible says in our theology as a collective body.
You are correct. You said we don't know as collectively, and that's why I've been pushing for something like the 24 Hours That Changed the World study. I'm ready to start other studies if you want, but I've only got 6 weeks here. So I'm hoping that you will allow Pastor Bill to do other studies with you, Bible studies and otherwise. I already know that there are groups in this church who do excellent Bible study, and I've stayed out of their way. The women's Bible study that was done, yeah? Is that going to be on again? Yes? Okay. And the youth group, they do Bible study and faith study. There are opportunities for that, and I hope more of you take advantage of those. Yes, they need to continue, and they are what define who we are as a church, and also who we are as individuals. What our relationship is with God and Jesus Christ, what God's relationship is with us. That is what we need to continue to grow on. And the group that met in January defined one of our biggest needs is to grow spiritually. And let's keep on doing that. That is more important for this church, this congregation, to grow spiritually, because that's part of our mission and ministry, than any discussion of what's right and wrong in terms of LGBTQ or any of those. Yes, this is the primary thing we should be focused on, is growing spiritually, and all the rest will fall into place. Can anybody grow spiritually? Yes, even me. I'm not that old yet. I've got a ways to go. Okay, anything else? Anybody else have one? Have a question? Now remember, I have an understanding of what happened at General Conference because of what I read afterwards. I have an understanding of what happened because of what I read afterwards, and I also have a good understanding of what happens in this conference because I'm on the board of ministry, if that helps any. I do know there was a time when we could ask the question, are you gay? Are you a lesbian? That went out years ago. It did. However, I can also tell you that one conference down south decided 2 years ago not to ordain anybody who came before the Board of Ministries for that conference. 16 people were turned away for ordination that year because one person said, I'm LGBTQ. Is that fair? I ask you, is that fair? To turn away the majority of the class because one person said, I am. And remember, that was when we still had the rule that you can't ordain somebody who's LGBTQ. And I thought that was a huge disservice to the ones who had prepared through seminary, through serving churches, through preparing for all the way up to their ordination, and at the last minute be told you can't be ordained. And they needed them. Some of them left ministry altogether. They were so disappointed. I don't want that to happen here. But I can tell you that we are still, by and large, a fairly conservative state. Am I right? I hate the label conservative. I'm not going to say right wing. Oh, did I just say that? No, we are. As a state, we are. 75% of Galleon that I used to serve voted for Trump and for Jim Jordan. And the church I served there was conservative. And yet that church voted, St. Paul Church voted to stay United Methodist by a 2/3 majority. 1/3 said we should disaffiliate, and 2/3 said we're going to stay. However, they did agree that they're going to make a policy that they're not going to do LGBTQ weddings. And in terms of getting an LGBTQ pastor, You know how small the chances are in Ohio to do that? West Ohio, maybe it's more of a chance, but East Ohio, like I said, I only know maybe one or two, and one of those is questionable. I do know a man who's a wonderful pastor, is unmarried, and I've never known whether he's gay or not. I never asked him, but he was one of my mentors. But he's never married. Does that give me the right to say he's gay? No. I don't know what his circumstances are, but he retired. He's no longer there. So anyway, any other questions? Yeah.
So I mean, I like that the attention seems to be shifting towards the local church again and enabling them. Us as a local church, how do we, well, I guess me individually, I'm not going to speak for the church. I'm beginning to struggle with what is becoming the connectional nature of the
Okay,
local church
good.
to the larger, all-inclusive umbrella.
Okay, right, right.
And
Here's-
the funding.
Here's
relative to our
let me put it
worship.
this way. I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. The United Methodist Church was founded about the same time this nation was, United States of America. We have one word that's in common with the names, United, okay? We are a connectional church. If somebody were to ask you today, and by the way, this is part of my teaching that I was going to do in the next 3 weeks, so you're getting a bonus right now, right? If someone were to ask you today, what sets apart United Methodists from Lutherans, Presbyterians, Roman Catholics, all the rest of them, Baptists, and so on? How about Mormons? What would you say to them? Give me it in a nutshell. Anybody have an idea? We're connected. C, connectionalism. That's the first word I give you today. Remember that word. We are a connection, which means Bonnie can go here and receive communion, and she can go to Washington, D.C. and receive communion in a Methodist church, and she can go to California and receive communion in a Methodist church. She could even go to Nairobi into a Methodist church. Or how about when we were in Germany, we found a Methodist church there. You can go and find a United Methodist church and receive Holy Communion, and your baptism is accepted because we are connected. The big letter C. Got that one? Are you ready for me to move on to the second letter? Yes? Everybody got C for connectionalism. Okay. We are not congregational. That's a different C. We are not congregational. Congregational means each church decides what it wants to do on everything. We decide on most things what we want to do, but there are some things on which we are common. Okay? And if you want to know what those are, I've got a whole class for you on that. Maybe I'll show the PowerPoint in church on Sunday sometime so that you get my, in a nutshell, teaching on what Methodism is, because it's so easy to learn. Second letter. What else defines us as a Methodist, United Methodist Church, as opposed to Baptist, Presbyterian, all those things I named earlier? The letter D. Here's a hint. We were founded about the same time that the country, USA, was founded. What is the US? Democracy. Yes, you win a prize. I'll give you my keys to my car. How's that? Oh, I don't have my keys. Sorry, you don't get that prize. All right, democracy. So you got C for connectionalism and a D for democracy. We are democratic. Does that mean that the pastor makes all the rules for this church? No. The lay people have more power than the pastor, right? But when we get to our annual
Does
conference...
D stand for Doris?
Nope,
No.
nope. No divorce, no disaffiliation. That's not what it says.
Doris.
Doris, for Doris.
Doris.
Oh, Doris. Does D stand for Doris?
D stands
D
for
does stand for Doris, but she's not democratic because she doesn't make all the rules either. No, here's the good news. Who is your lay member to annual conference? Not Doris.
Ed Cochran.
Don't say you. Ed Cochran. I'm going to annual conference as one of your members who represents Otterbein Church. I'm going to annual conference as one of your 2 members, and Ed Cochran is the other member. I cannot rule and make rules for this church without him either saying yes or no that fits our mission and purpose.
I won't say this one. So I'm a little nervous. You're representing us, but you can't even get a church assigned.
Guess what? I do have a church assigned. I have a place to go.
But it's
Lutheran church. Yeah. But I'm only with you until annual conference, okay? But I can make I can speak for you, but I don't speak only. Not only I speak for you, but also Ed. We have two people from this church, not just one. It's not just your pastor. Now, let me ask you, do you know a church that's not connectional, but congregational? UCC, United Church of Christ. Presbyterian, Lutheran. Lutherans are kind of connectional. But Presbyterians and UCC are not connectional. Unity Church is not connectional. They make their own decisions in their own church, and that's it. Okay, now, D. You know a church that's not democratic? Come on, that's an easy one. Catholic, yes. Let's be specific. Roman Catholic. Roman Catholic Church is not connectional. Who makes the decisions there? The Pope, the bishops. Even when the Council of Bishops meets, it is only a Council of Bishops of North America. And that Council of Bishops of North America set the rules for all the churches in North America, and guess what? The lay people do not count because they're not democratic. Lay people have no vote in the Roman Catholic Church, but you have a vote. You have a vote in your ad council. And as for trustees, I'm not a member. The pastor is not a member unless the pastor is specifically elected to trustees. Okay? So you have power. Lay people have power as much as the clergy do in the United Methodist Church because we're democratic. Third one. What follows the letter D? C, D, and E. Okay, E. We are Episcopal. Episcopal is a word many people don't know. It just means having bishops as our spiritual heads. And we don't have just one bishop. We have one bishop for a conference. We're going to have one bishop for the whole state. But we have 32 bishops. Not yet. We have 39 right now, but we're going to end up with 32 pretty soon. Is it 32 or 36? I forget. It was on the slide there. 32, right. I have to get these numbers straight. So those are the three letters that define United Methodism as distinct from others. Can you think of a church that doesn't have bishops? Baptist? UCC? Free Methodist? Lots of churches don't have bishops. But if we have all three, we are United Methodist. Okay? And yes, we have power. And what I see as the greatest thing about this general conference is that we actually ended up with more power as a local church than we ever had before, well, for about 50 years or more. So it's a good thing. Anyway, what I recommend is you don't take my word for it. I've just been studying this stuff for 2 days. But you actually look at all the words that came out of General Conference and ask people about it. Ask the DS when you get an opportunity. Ask others about it. I've asked 2 leaders, and remember, this is new stuff, okay? They may not have given me the right answers either. But what I can tell you is that right now, I don't know if you agree or not, you may tell me I'm way off base, but right now, you and I are a good match of minister and congregation. I love you people. You may not love me, but I think probably I could be safe to say most of you do, or some of you do, or a few of you do. I'm getting smaller. Can I get one hand? No, but here's the thing. Just remember that the same system that has been providing you with 4 ministers in just a few short months is a system that didn't let you go and is bringing the 4th one in shortly. Because the church that my wife is serving right now, the Lutheran Church, Christ Lutheran Church on Amherst, it was God's act that took us to them. On a day in July, anybody want to leave? Go ahead. This is a quick story though. On a day in July when the power went out in our house, we couldn't get in because all we had was a garage door remote. I'd failed to keep a front door key. We ended up at Meldrum's restaurant to eat dinner and waited out. I overheard a couple whose backs were to me on the pew. We were in one pew and not a pew, booth. I'm sorry, I meant booth. We were in one booth and they were behind me, and I overheard them saying, when will we ever get a minister? And so I turned around like a busybody and I said, which church are you talking about? And they said, we're the Lutheran church on Amherst. And I said, why don't you have a minister? Our minister had to leave right before Palm Sunday because her husband moved out west. They moved to Illinois, and she got a church out there, and we don't have a minister. Well, what do? They said, well, we used to have weekly communion. That's what we're used to, but we haven't had communion since March, and here it is mid-July. And I said, what are you doing for worship? And she said, she, meaning Susie said, there's a young man in our congregation who's been preaching for us, and that's been keeping us going, but people are not coming to church much anymore because we don't have a pastor. He's there Sunday mornings, but he works in the mills, and he's not a pastor. He's not ordained. And I opened my mouth and said to Steve and Susie and the couple who were across from them, I said, did you know that we have a joint agreement with the Lutherans that we can share in ministry? I'm retired now, and I'm not getting licensed as a drug counselor. For now, I could probably help you out. This was in July. And they said, how do we get a hold of you? And I said, here's my number. Well, they had to go to the bishop's assistant and let them know. And at the end of August, I got a call from the bishop's assistant and said, can you please help us out right now? I said, well, I'm free right now. And I checked with our bishop, and the bishop said, yes, go ahead. I checked with our DS, and DS said, sure, go ahead for now. And my wife started there in September, and I started October, November, December. But they did not have a full-time minister because we only did Sunday morning worship. And that church is hurting so bad. Why? Because they are not connectional. They don't get a pastor as soon as one leaves. Matt was out of here the very next Sunday. Carl was here, right? You didn't even have to wait for pulpit supply, some lay speaker to step in for you. You got a fully ordained elder. And when Carl was done, Ash came in. And when Ash leaves, Bill Eckert's coming here. Bill is not ordained, but he's a local pastor with all the rights and privileges in this congregation that I have. So this is the good thing about having a system where one pastor leaves and the next day somebody else is in. And for that you can thank the United Methodist Church. And God, yes. It's been a God thing all along. Whoever knew that Doris Brown would look at me and say, hey, you were the guy who did the India thing in UMW School of Mission, 15 years ago? Something like that. Whoever knew that? God would put me here. I tell people I'm not in charge of my destiny. I don't know what my future holds, but I know who holds my future, and I hope you grab that and hold on to it too. You know who holds your future. And I'm done preaching, folks. Any other questions? Amen. Yeah, me too. Any other questions? How about you? You had some questions last time. Did we answer them? No, not yet. We have some answers now. What's your question?
My question was, will the congregation get to vote on any of this again?
Okay. Ask your question to the microphone. No, hold on. Ask your...
Can I make that two-parter?
Yeah, but put it in here.
I don't need that.
Okay, don't...
I remember Bigelow used to get up there and preach to the whole congregation back here.
Right. Okay, you don't need that.
No, I don't need it.
Don't need it.
No, I lost my train of thought.
Will the congregation be able to vote again?
Be able to vote on it, and would that have solved our problem to begin with? Way back in December of last year, right?
Right.
That's when it all started.
Year before last, yeah.
Before that?
It was March.
Okay, and we had congregational meetings right after church. We sat in here and listened to everything. We submitted our questions, and then it was all gone. And I was confused, and I think a lot of other people are confused.
Right.
And as far as I'm concerned, we lost a lot of good families because that was not taken care of at the right time. As far as I'm concerned.
Okay, I wasn't here then, but I've read about it and I've heard about it. No, I know that. So the question is, will we still get to vote on stuff yet? Okay, now, first of all the stuff I shared with you on that screen about General Conference, none of that is ratified right now. We're still under the 2016 Book of Discipline. 8 years old and still going strong. Now, here's what happens next. All their decisions that they made are going to go to all the annual conferences and be voted on by the annual conferences. Who from this church goes to annual conference? Ed Cochran and Ash Welch. Doris goes too, but she's not from this church that she's going. She is a lay, yeah.
All of the petitions that passed the last 2 weeks, not all of them have to go to,
Not all of them, but most, yeah, all the big ones, yeah.
just regionalization, just those things that pertain to the constitutional changes.
Right.
The things that affect the social principles.
Yeah, those are, right, yeah, you're correct. But if you want to know whether we get any say in it, we get a say in all the constitutional changes, okay?
Which
We get to vote.
primarily amounts to, the things that were constitutional were primarily around regionalization.
Regionalization and also the wording on homosexuality, that was in the thing, the first part. It wasn't all in, there were two paragraphs, one in social principles and the other in the Constitution.
I think to say we are not a congregational church, so we don't have a right as a congregation to vote.
Well, that's not exactly true. It's just the opposite.
It's not, it's
Yeah.
not given that we vote.
Well, actually, it's complicated because we vote on matters that pertain to us as a congregation. For example, the trustees decided to put a camera on the south lane there. They voted on that. It passed, and so we're going to get to do that. We can make some things. We are in charge of a lot that pertains to this church. The trustees voted on that, not the whole congregation, not for that.
But I wanted you to make clear that
Yeah, not everybody votes on everything. Let me state it that way. Not everybody votes on everything. Like, for example, you probably don't want to vote on whether we have a camera in the back corner or not. You probably are glad that the trustees are taking care of that for you. The Now Committee votes on calendar, for example. And so they'll be doing that on Monday night. There are different groups that vote on certain things. But as a whole, we have power as a congregation to vote on some things that affect this congregation.
Was that his ask? He was asking,
On all the things about general conference, or disaffiliation, you're asking about disaffiliation, leaving the United Methodist Church? Now we can open up, because the agreement that I understood was that it was going to be tabled until after general conference. Now we're open to talk about that. So next Wednesday night, let's come back here and let's start talking about that. Okay? We'll talk about our future, where we want to go. That's what my promise is to you. No, really, all the stuff that was tabled in February of last year, that's when it was, right? March? Was it in March? Doris, do you remember the meeting? I thought you said February. The meeting when it was decided that we will not talk about February. I thought, that's the minutes I saw. The minutes I saw were February. In February of last year, the motion was made and passed that we will not discuss disaffiliation until after general conference.
Right, but we discussed it in April, so we busted that.
We didn't discuss it. We didn't.
Oh, yeah, we discussed it last meeting, right, in April.
All we did at the last meeting in April was to talk about what's coming to general conference. Okay? I gave you all what the proposals were coming to general conference. We didn't talk about what would pass and what wouldn't pass. I just said this is what's being brought to conference. That's all I did. Okay? Now, you know that disaffiliation did not pass. Okay, so can we talk about disaffiliation? No. But if you want to, we can talk about whether this church moves forward as United Methodists or not, because that avenue is still open to us. We can still talk about whether we will accept an ordained clergy person who's LGBTQ. We can still talk about whether we're going to allow for gay weddings to happen in this church, or lesbian weddings, or trans weddings. We still have those things to talk about. The things that were decided at conference, we can still talk about. And as far as leaving the United Methodist Church, I don't know what you all think. Neither do we. And that's why we need to start meeting and talking about it. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? How much will it cost to leave? Maybe somebody's got that question and wants to find out. I don't know. How much will it cost to stay? What do we gain by, and what is the real issue that we need to deal with as a church? Spiritual growth? Or are we going to get sidetracked and distracted by something else? That's what we need to decide. So let's come back next Wednesday night. It's already 8:48. I don't care what time it is. I can stay here, as I said, for 1,000 petitions. No, we're not going to do that. But we can still stay on and vote and talk and things like that. But I think it's good to take a step back and get some more information. Ask what the conference accomplished, General Conference. Take a look at what's online. Make notes. Bring your arguments and discussions next week and share with each other. We'll do that. You know why? We can all agree to disagree, but we must all love each other as children of God. That's what John Wesley taught, and that's what I believe. Basically, I am still a Wesleyan Methodist. Not from the Wesleyan Methodist Church, but I believe in what John Wesley and his brother Charles taught, and all the others who started out this whole movement. And if you want, my plan was from next week to talk about specifically what those things are. The forms of grace, prevenient, justifying, sanctifying grace. What does that mean? How does God work in this world? I can show you a quick slideshow next week and you'll get it. You'll say, hey, that makes a lot of sense. And you're going to say to me, why don't you copyright that and publish it? And I'm going to say, no, that's not what I do. Lots of people have said that. But I can share that with you. It's just a simple, 8 slides or something like that. Who God is and how God acts in this world. What's our relationship to God? And you go, oh yeah. And those are the things that we want to focus on, is growing as a church. And as much as I can, I'm going to keep us united as a church as well. Okay, anything else? Everybody, by the way, has a right to speak here. Whether you agree or disagree with conference, here's where you can say it. Whether you agree or disagree with me, and you know what I noticed tonight? We pretty much agree with each other. We do. Yeah. You know a little more about me tonight than most churches that I've served, because they never wanted to ask the questions. And you did. You had the guts to do that, and it's a good thing. So keep on doing it. We're good. Let us pray. Holy God, we thank you for this time together in what Wesley called holy conferencing. Yes, we conferenced together, we talked and saw what we like, what we don't like, and we spoke with each other, holding each other in dignity and respect. We love you, God, because you make this all possible. Why? Because we all love your Son, Jesus Christ, who lived and died for each of us, so that we can be forgiven of the past and move on into the future, to take on his mission to make and mature disciples in our corner of the world. Oh God, we love you and pray all this in Jesus' name. And now send us forth in peace and not in pieces. Amen. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for those online. Oh, wait. Before you go, I have a gift for you. Here you go. Full transparency is what I proclaim, okay? Yes, please. You can get this side. Would you like to hand these out on this side? Make sure everybody gets one. This is all my notes. I kept nothing back. All the words. And you can take this home and study it. And this all came